In this video, we're going to take a look at our module number 8, Sprint Retrospective, List of Data with Bootstrap and Timeleaf, and Logging. We're going to cover several interesting topics in this learning module, including a review of our retrospective from last week, also debugging. One thing that is interesting about our field is that we tend to think that we sit around and write iPhone apps all day, but really a lot of what we're doing is we're trying to figure out some code that somebody else wrote. Maybe we need to add to it, maybe we need to support something that's in production, or maybe we need to diagnose an error that's already happened. This is really what we're going to spend most of our day doing, is looking at these kind of things. So debugging is very important. We're also going to take a look at how to show a list of data in Timeleaf, which is really neat. And we're going to show how to make a link that's dynamic because we're going to parameterize a unique identifier. Now, taking a look at the learning module, we're going to see a video HTML view to controller service DAO. This one's neat because it shows the entire lifecycle flow of putting data into an HTML page, getting it to the DAO, and getting it all the way back to the HTML page again. We're going to take a look at Timeleaf's THEACH and Bootstrap list group and how to integrate these two things together. So Timeleaf, which allows us to have Java variables like a list and make those available to an HTML page, and then Bootstrap, which is a library which allows us to use some interesting UI components like this thing called list group. After that, we're going to look at a discussion of exceptions in Java. This is interesting because exceptions are one of those things you hear about in Computer Programming 1, Computer Programming 2, and you hear about the syntax, but not always how to really use them. A lot of times you need a good example. I know some very versed and experienced Java programmers who find exceptions very confusing. So this overview should give us a little bit of a foundation on how we can use some exception best practices. Think of this in code review. Exceptions are a big thing that you can take a look at in code review, and a big thing that you can tweak, that you can make suggestions on in code review. So think about watching this video right before doing the code review, or maybe while doing the code review. Overview of logging best practices and examples in Spring Boot. This is an interesting video again because logging is very important. Many times as software developers we are looking at production issues and we have to go back in time and see what happened when an error occurred. Naturally, we don't have a time machine and we can't always replicate things exactly as they were because we might not know all the details. So logging best practices talks about how we can put some logging into our code to make it useful so that we can look and see what happened when an error occurred. And we can categorize issues by error, fatal, warning, and then just informational issues and debug and trace. So if you're still using system out println, you're probably doing it the wrong way, to be honest, for many reasons. One is that system out println doesn't have a concept of priority, and it's hard to filter without this concept of priority. So we'll take a look at a lot of that in this video. Now the final video, logback configuration in Spring Boot, explained with a demonstration. This is something that I didn't see a whole lot of information out on the internet to describe it. So I did a bit of research and made a brand new video out of it, as are all the videos from this learning module. Nonetheless, I kind of feel a little bit leading edge when there's something where there's not a whole lot of information and I'm able to make a video out of it. So hopefully that video is a nice benefit. Now, let's take a look at the retrospective. There weren't a whole lot of comments on the retrospective board, not as many as I had hoped. So I encourage you, if you haven't done so already, add some comments out there. This is typically something that's done as a group even. Well, as a group, all of the group in a room, but each individual suggests something. So the comments all come from individuals, but the group looks at it. This is our opportunity to look at it. So I'm going to take a look at a few from this semester. But since there weren't a whole lot of comments, I'm going to go back to a previous semester. I typically see some common themes in the retrospective at this state, and I want to go over some of those themes. So what went well? Communication was good, and everyone made it to meetings on time and did a good job of working together. Wonderful. Good communication helped us get more organized and plan in advance, so definitely see communication. There are periods of downtime that could have been used more effectively. On what could be improved. Periods of downtime that could be used more effectively. Okay, I misunderstood the board. I'm going to skip that one because that's kind of procedural. Procrastination can be a big factor for me because I work full-time and have 3 other classes, 2 of which are entirely group-based. I need to start getting my work done before the work week even begins. When I was in college, probably like a lot of people in this class, I put myself through school and I worked nearly full-time and usually over breaks got a temporary job in addition to my job to pay for books and things like that. One of the biggest things I really learned out of that was time management and prioritization. In high school, you tend to get a manageable workload where there's an expectation that you can get everything done. In college, I tend to think sometimes you get a workload where you really have to pick and choose a little bit. I thought, okay, great, I'm going to graduate, and then I'm not going to have to worry about this anymore because I'll be at a manageable 40-hour work week, but not at all. That time management prioritization is something that I use every day in my job because there's just not enough time in a week to get done everything that I need to do. So I think that's an important lesson. Action items start doing. We need to sort out actionable tasks better, earlier, and more evenly next time. I recommend using a sprint board for that. That'd be an approach I'd take, but maybe your group can find another way to do it. It would be beneficial to start working on our actionables before the deadlines. Working piece by piece can help you catch mistakes you would not have caught previously and prevent procrastination. All good points. So reason I wanted to show this and then jump to kind of a retro from a previous semester is one thing I like about the Ide Boardz and many other online tools like this is it's common to end up with maybe a dozen tasks under each of these columns. Let's say you have a Scrum team with about 9 members. Each member makes 3 suggestions per column, which is about typical. You're looking at about 27 tasks or 27 sticky notes or to-dos for each of these columns. Now, some will overlap, so you consolidate and you might get under 20. But nonetheless, taking action on them is a lot like learning shortcuts. I can tell you 25 shortcuts, and if you try to memorize all of them, you won't memorize one. But if you pick 2 this week, you'll memorize those. If you pick 2 more next week, you'll memorize those. Keep going, you'll eventually know all of them, just like Scrum. So what we'll typically do at this point is we can go in and we can vote on these. And then, after we voted, we can go back and see who's the biggest vote getter. And from that, we can decide that these are the 2 or 3 that we want to prioritize in this sprint. So that's where these get really handy. So with that, we can see that, and I hit escape to get out of that, we can see that we have a +1 here because I voted on it. So typically we'll do some kind of task like that. Now here's a look at retrospective from previous semester. So stop doing, messing around with GitHub configuration. Hopefully that's all finalized at this point. Not communicating issues. Start early on small tasks. That would probably be a start doing, really. Stop procrastinating. Group meetings with missing members. Stop working in isolation. Stop getting too much into detail. Stop doing big commits versus small commits. Stop using the Scrum board more. Again, I think that would be a start doing. I think that was probably in the wrong column. And then stop concentrating on future stories. Focus more on current. This is from a previous semester, but this is a common theme, something that I saw in many semesters. And what do we want to continue? Behavior-driven design, communication, collaboration, communication tools, GroupMe, Slack, etc. Whatever works great for your group works for me. I know a lot of groups in the past have liked Slack and GroupMe. And then working in separate branches. So these are things that have worked well. What do we want to start doing? Start using the same IDE. Yeah, definitely we want to take a look at that, and we also want to make sure that we're using the same version of the IDE so that it's compatible across our team. Meet more often, ask more questions to each other. That's one thing I've heard a lot of successful teams mention is that they did 2 different stand-ups in a week. They might pick like a Monday and a Thursday, or maybe a Sunday and a Wednesday, something like that. But the most successful groups typically tell me that they did do multiple stand-ups in one week. Spend more time with stubs. Okay, so mock things out so that one person downstream is not waiting for you to finish a full implementation, but instead they have a stub to work with. Work on features sooner, make better use of the Scrum board, manage time, understand requirements, more stand-ups again, and then frequent commits to the repository. So here again, feedback from a previous semester, but all things I think that many groups have felt and many groups have decided to share as a part of a retrospective. Now, this won't be our final retrospective. We'll have one more after Sprint 2. Sprint 3 will be our presentation, but really you could get together and do a retro after that as well. In a job I had a while ago, there was a project manager who really didn't like retrospectives because he said it took the team away from keyboards for 4 hours. Depending on the size of the retro, they could go 1 hour, 2 hour, 4 hours. Generally about 1 hour per week of the sprint is what I found. Now, the trick is if you don't do this ending ceremony, you never really have a time to stop and sharpen the saw. And when you stop and sharpen the saw, you'll find that the productivity that you gain just from having this kind of communication and seeing what you can do better more than pays for that time of the retrospective. When in doubt, consider computing velocity, which is the number of story points that you get done in a sprint. What you should see is that the number of story points assigned to a story is consistent over time. As we get better, the story points are still the same. But what does change is the velocity. So the velocity is the sum of the story points that you've completed in a sprint. And as we're doing these retros, we should see velocity increasing. And that's the kind of evidence you can take back to somebody who thinks that retrospectives are a waste of time and say, but look at how much our velocity is increasing because we have this opportunity to go back and sharpen the saw. One more thing that I want to take a look at is our Scrum board because we are at the end of sprint. So catalog my specimens. Create BDD test for GWT for DAO layer. We didn't really do a whole lot of that. I'm not going to worry about it too much. We'll go ahead and move that to done. Create a look and feel page for insert and edit mode. And we still want to do, we did do that. We did do a look and feel. That's our start page. Let's move that to complete. Create a look and feel page for view mode. We're going to get to some of that this week, so I'll mark that in progress. Handle inputs through the Spring controller. We did that. Create a service implementation, we did that. So all in all, our first sprint went pretty well. Now, add photo to specimen, and I'm going to add a new story as well. We'll say persist specimens. And for persist specimens, we'll say install WAMP, Windows Apache MySQL PHP, which we will likely do in our next learning module. Okay, and then we'll say create database users, save, create schema, so the tables and the like that we'll see in a database. Okay, that's good. Connect database to application. Now that might be using something called JPA, which we don't completely understand yet, so research JPA, the Java Persistence Engine. Okay, so we'll start with that. I might add a few more sprint tasks a little bit later through the week. Add photo to specimen. Okay, so we'll say add upload capability for large multimedia files. Create a storage location for photos. And we might even say we might need some way to watermark or resize. So let's say resize photos. Okay. And this is where the database is going to come in because we can say associate photos with specimens in database, something like that. So probably a few more things I could task out here. We're going to need a screen, aren't we? So some kind of, well, actually we could just do it on our existing screen. We need to show the photos, right? Show the photos that have been uploaded. Actually quite a bit of work here in the things that I've just put out. So definitely a lot more I could task out here, but this will get us off to a good start. So we'll come back, we'll revisit this next week, and we'll see what we have. We have quite a bit of interesting work coming ahead of us. I didn't even put the logging on here that we're going to do. I could probably add that to the environment setup. Why don't we go ahead and do that? So we'll say add, because that way I can put that in progress as well. So we'll say add detailed logging framework. Okay, and that's what we'll work on this week, so we will put it into in progress. So lots of great things coming in this sprint. And many times I get the question, what's due in Sprint 2? That's really up to your team. I encourage your team and your product owner to look over your stories and determine what you want to pick off for Sprint 2, and then task them out as I've done here. I put some general guidance in the description of the final project, which is things like figure out the persistence layer, enhance the user interface. And then Sprint 3, which will come next, is where we do a lot of integration of all these layers together. But really, we should be doing integration all along. So what you do in the Sprint 2 is up to you. Think about the stories that are going to add the most value. Work with your product owner and your technical team. And I look forward to seeing what you produce. Thank you.